When you fire up Marvel Rivals and start sifting through the heroes list, you'll find Squirrel Girl, and the first thing you might notice is that her difficulty level is set to 1 star, meaning they consider her one of the easiest and most approachable characters to play as. But for some reason, people also seem to think that the easier a character is to play, the lower their ceiling is in terms of performance. In my experience, these two things are not always related, and in the case of Squirrel Girl, I can definitely say that while she may be approachable, she is far from bad. In fact, I find her to be an extremely deadly hero out in the arena. In this video, I'll break down the best ways to leverage her kit, so you can be highly effective without having to play a hyper-complex character, so let's get into it. First off, let me lay down Squirrel Girl's two greatest strengths. One is area denial, and the other is her ability to shut down snipers and ranged enemies. Let's take a look at these one thing at a time, starting with area denial. So Squirrel Girl really shines when the enemy is forced into a bottleneck or a choke point. Hallways and doorways are your friend. That's because she's a lot like Junkrat from Overwatch or the Demo Man from Team Fortress. She's a lobber, and her bread and butter is her acorn slingshot. It's got 10 shots before needing a reload, and these projectiles bounce and ricochet in a very predictable way. They do about 110 base damage, which is quite respectable, and after you tag an enemy, you can then bounce the acorns off the wall if they run away, allowing you to potentially kill them when they're behind cover. So getting used to firing these acorns is what's really going to elevate your game the most. So consider this guy, who killed several people on our team, including myself, by essentially rolling the acorns up this slope. If he shoots high, they'll just sail over our heads. Since we're at a higher elevation, they won't bounce off anything and come back. It's useless. But instead, he chooses to shoot at a shallow angle into the slope itself and let the acorns roll up to our feet and detonate for a ton of area damage. Well played, sir. But another reason why we like choke points and hallways is because Squirrel Girl has an acorn trap grenade that she can throw. So it rolls in a straight line, it bounces off of surfaces until it detonates or finds a target to hit. On hit, it will lock the enemy down for a brief moment, allowing you to get a free hit or two on them. Now this ability is super important for players trying to make the most out of her kit, and we'll revisit this in a moment. But remember that the longer you hold down the button for this trap grenade, the more force you'll put behind it, and the faster it will travel, the further it will go, the more times it will bounce off of surfaces. The second strength that I mentioned was her ability to counter snipers and ranged enemies. Every team seems to have at least one player who likes to find a perch high up where they can just take pot shots at the group on the objective point. When you spot one of these players, it's time to go on the hunt. So Squirrel Girl has a tail bounce ability where she can spring herself up into the air. And it has a pretty short cooldown too, so you can use this a lot in combat, especially if you're trying to lob grenades down on people. You want to bounce up to their perch from the side if possible, and then toss your trap grenade at them to hold them in place for a moment, while you blast them with acorns and shut them down. These enemies usually don't have big health pools, and you can drop them in 3 acorns, or maybe 2 if you get that headshot while they're locked down. Do this enough times to the same enemy, they'll be forced to change their strategy or even change characters. Next, we got to talk about 2 things that Squirrel Girl players hate the most, and that's dueling flying enemies and dueling melee heroes. Let's start with the flyers. If you find yourself fighting an Iron Man or a Storm, for example, you may get frustrated and struggle to put them down, but there are definitely good ways of dealing with them. The first thing we need to talk about is trigger discipline. This is huge. Since she's a lobber, people often fall into the trap of just holding the trigger down and just constantly lobbing projectiles at their enemies. I recommend that you only do this when the enemy is clustered up, but never do this in an open engagement. This is what we call trigger discipline, and it's super important if you want to maximize your potential with Squirrel Girl. Make every click or trigger pull intentional and only fire when you mean to. This is especially important against flyers. Let me show you. Instead of spamming shots, take the time to line up each projectile. Flyers are relatively predictable in their movement patterns, and if you lead your shots, then you're much more likely to make contact. Take note of the direction that they're moving in, because most flyers can't change directions rapidly more than once in short succession, and they can't accurately fire back while they're doing it either. So take advantage of this. lead your shots a bit. This is much easier the closer you are, mind you, and that might mean that you need to use your tail bounce to fly up into their space and take a couple of easy shots at them. Flyers also get scared easily, I've found. 1 or 2 shots into them and they'll often put on the afterburners and jet out of there. Be sure to ping them for your teammates too, so they can get a shot in as well. Once you've learned to deal with the flyers, that just leaves what I think is the biggest Achilles heel for Squirrel Girl. It's melee heroes. Now these are heroes like Spider-Man, Wolverine, Magic, etc. They're agile and they're mobile, while also really deadly in close quarters. And we don't have a ton of HP to take a lot of hits from these characters. I'm not gonna lie to you, this is her biggest weakness. There are things that you can do to try and fight them and lock them down, but you can also focus on trying just not to get isolated away from your team by one of these characters. So the best thing you can do is use your team as a tether point. You can break off to go put down a sniper, but then double right back to your team and especially to your strategists. That will help keep you from getting targeted by a melee character. But if you do find yourself locked in a room with a melee enemy, the best thing you can do is try to leverage your trap grenade to lock them down momentarily and hit them with a shot, then use your mammal synergy ability to instantly cool down another trap grenade again and drop it right away a second time. This is your best shot. But you also need to avoid spamming shots, right? Trigger discipline against these guys is super important. If you hit the bottom of your ammo reserves and you're forced to reload, you're almost certainly dead. Now the last thing we need to talk about specifically is her ultimate ability, the Squirrel Stampede. This ability actually pretty fun to use, pretty dang lethal when used properly. What you're looking for is obviously clustered up enemies, but more important than that is a second variable, and that's the hard cover behind your enemies. Squirrel Stampede bounces off of hard surfaces and doubles back for enemies to hit them multiple times. So you want to line it up. So it will hit an enemy or 2 or 3, but also you want a hard surface behind them so the Stampede then turns around and comes back for them a second time. If you do this in a tight room, you can get 3 or more hits with the same ultimate and do some serious damage. This is right in line with her core strength of being good at area denial and good in choke points and bottlenecks. That's why those are the spaces that you want to focus on the most with Squirrel Girl. And again, a polite reminder that if you find yourself in a duel in an open area, trigger discipline is your friend. Slow down, don't spam, pull the trigger exactly when you have a shot lined up and you mean to fire. That's my best advice for leveraging Squirrel Girl's kit and maximizing her potential in Marvel Rivals. One last bit of advice: if you find yourself in a duel you think you are most certainly going to lose, you can always use her tail bounce as a means of getting out of there so long as you don't have a low ceiling above you. Well, there you have it. I hope you learned something new and enjoyed the video. If you did, then feel free to leave a like on the video, as that's the best free way to support the channel right here on YouTube, and consider subscribing for more videos. Be warm and well fed, my friends, and I hope to catch you out in the arena. Bye-bye.